So we're going to look at music and the part it played in the Woodlanders. But quickly, we want to give you a quick introduction to the Hardys and the Hardy family and how they themselves were involved in the music of the time. I'm guessing that most of you, being Hardy connoisseurs, will already understand these connections. But if I just recap for those who may not. So the Hardy family, right back, definitely to Hardy's great-grandfather, perhaps before, had been musicians in the churches in Puddletown and Stinsford Church. And they'd gone every Sunday and played all of the music for the hymns until in about 1844 the organ came along with a new vicar and the band were disbanded from the churches. Hardy, being only 4 years old at this point, completely missed out on the church music tradition except at Christmas with the carolings. But the other flip side to that was that being the musicians from the church, they also had all of the links with the community and became the musicians for all of the parties as well. And so when you read the manuscript books, which they kept and collected all of their tunes within, there are tune books in the museum from about 1790 through to about 1860, you'll see that quite often they've got this strange intermix of the sacred music for church and then these secular pieces that they play in the evenings for local parties. And Hardy, from the age of 4, was involved in this musical tradition. He was given his first squeeze box when he was 4 years old by very, very brave parents. And then he learnt how to tune a violin, and by the age of 11 could play alongside his father at these parties. And his mother, being quite a kind of strict woman who saw the place that she'd gained socially as being something that was very, very precarious, having seen where her mother and her grandparents had fallen socially from grace. She always said, you've got to be very careful who you mix with. So this music that they took part in was a key part of Hardy's education into kind of the wider social circles surrounding them. So first of all, we're going to play you one of the pieces that represents the church tradition that Hardy hankered after and which had started off the family's music. And so this one is going to represent slightly different traditions. So this is the lively tradition that they're playing in the evenings. And with this change in the tone, I want you to imagine at Giles's party, Melbury turns up with with Grace, and says, okay, we'll sit down, we'll have some food and everything. And then he slowly cottons on to the fact that Giles has actually invited the Great Hintock band. And of course, the Great Hintock band only means one thing, that there is going to be music. And he calls it, he says, if I'd known this was going to be a bouncing kind of party. And so this is the kind of music that you've got to imagine these kind of whirling figures bouncing along to, and Melbury looking on thinking, well, it was okay for me, but for Grace, oh dear. This one's called The New Rigged Ship. next one is another whirling one, but this one is particularly special because have any of you read The Self-Unseeing? Come on, this is where you show your true Hardy knowledge. So The Self-Unseeing is a poem that Hardy writes about his childhood, and it talks about his father bowing it higher and higher next to the big ingle nook in Hardy's cottage parlour, and his mother sitting by. And Hardy was quite an emotional child and quite a musical child. And so while his father danced, he'd turn round and round and round in circles and dance to himself across the stone flag floor. And as he danced faster and faster, he'd start crying because he was just so emotional and so carried away with this music. He was a boy who didn't mind bouncing, gyrating parties, obviously. And as he started crying, he'd turn around faster and faster and faster so that his father couldn't see him crying and he didn't betray himself. And so the song that, one of the songs that was recorded as being Hardy's favourite song was this one called Enrico, which I always imagine as being the one that he was dancing around in circles to in this childlike dream, in this kind of golden haze in Hardy's cottage. So that's kind of giving you an idea of the whirling party. And so when Melbury brings Grace along to this, it's, now of course it's this lovely quaint music that we're playing and it's lovely country dancing and barn dancing. But the phrase, of course, when she comes along and sees, it's the kind of thing that everyone knew the common steps to it. You wouldn't have a caller telling you what the dance steps were. It would be that everyone knew these because they'd grown up dancing them. And especially these ones that you do, the jigs and the reels and the hornpipes, they're far older tunes. So it's things that, really you grew up dancing them, you've known them off by heart from childhood. But it says that Grace had been away from home so long that she had forgotten the old figures and hence did not join in the movement. And so you got this sense that she's kind of been cut off from that, she's ostracised from it. She's not really the kind of most forward girl in the world anyway. And so at this point she has to sit in the corner and watch everyone else. And it says, as for her, she was thinking as she watched the gyrations of a very different measure that she had been accustomed to tread, with a bevy of sylph-like creatures in muslin, in the music room of a large house, most of whom were now moving in scenes widely removed from this as both regarded place and character. And so here she is watching these gyrations, which I think is such a wonderful way of describing the dancing going on in front of her, and her father describing it as bouncing. And now we're going to play you one of the more modern pieces from the Hardy collection, which is a waltz which, unlike nearly every tune in the Hardy collection, actually has a composer's name next to it, called Libitsky. And it's called the Elfin Waltz, and it gives you a sense of that different tone that she was imagining, and that completely different pace. And you've got to imagine it in a kind of big, airy, glassy room like this, rather than in one of the smoky little cottages, like Hardy was remembering from his father playing. see how immediately it completely changes the mood of the room, and her little daydream that she's off in the corner with these beautiful sylph-like maidens. We've got another one here called La Garçon Volage, which is a quadrille, and this too is another dance that was more typical of later periods. And as I understand it, I'm not a dancer of the quadrille, so please correct me if I'm wrong, but the quadrille traditionally has 5 different parts to it. And each of those parts has then a combination of, in all of this music, there's an A music, a B music, and a C music, normally 8 bars long, and then you repeat them in some kind of combination to form the dance. And the A music normally mirrors one bit of the dance, and the B music will mirror another, a bit like a verse and a chorus. The quadrille, on the other hand, has a strange combination where it's kind of A, B for one of the dancers and A, B, C, B for another dance, and constantly changing around. So it's for the people who haven't been partaking of Giles's cider and can actually remember what their feet are doing after several dances. So again, it's one of those ones that she would have been dancing in these big airy rooms. So we're going to try and play it with that kind of pomp and circumstance that it needs. And so she gets caught between these two worlds, and you see that obviously through the whole of the book, but I think it's interesting that Hardy uses that music there to put such a strong juxtaposition behind it. And of course, if you're just reading the book and you don't know what this music sounds like, then it's just a phrase, it's an image of sylph-like creatures. But for Hardy, he would have had all these tunes in his memory, and they would have been playing along in the background as he wrote these lines. So you've got that amazing direct comparison. The kind of third type of music that Hardy uses in this, and which features in the manuscripts, are songs. And Hardy, the kind of general folk collectors of the time, collected a load of songs around the place, but Hardy's also did as they progressed through the 19th century. And one of the ones that Hardy refers to is when they're coming back from Giles's party, he sings I Wish, I Wish, which is a song about a woman losing her virginity, and Melbury says, how can they be singing that around Grace? This is the kind of person we've been forced to mix with at this party. And the lines on that are, said she, quotes the maid, again, never shall be till apples grow on an orange tree. And so you've got Hardy there kind of using his knowledge of that song. And then the one we're going to try and sing for you now is Foggy, Foggy Dew. And so I imagine most of you have heard of the Benjamin Britten arrangement. And we found one from Bridport. And Cecil Sharp went round collecting tunes around the country long after the Hardys were playing them. And it seems that he did this mostly by going into pubs, buying people drinks until they agreed to sing for him, and then furiously scribbling down what they sang. And so you get these amazing notations where he says, I think they meant to sing a flat, but they'd had a few by then. And this one is a lot more eerie than the one that Benjamin Britten wrote. But it's interesting because I don't know if you remember the bit, but it's where Suki and Fitzpiers meet in the haystack. And so the section is, he approached and set about turning over the heaps one by one. As soon as he paused, tantalised and puzzled, he was directed anew by an imitative kiss, which came from her hiding place, and by snatches of a local ballad in the smallest voice she could assume, "O come in from the foggy, foggy dew." In a minute or two, he uncovered her. And of course, we all know what happens then. And so this song was banned from the BBC being broadcast, unless it was part of a Benjamin Britten broadcast or a folk broadcast, because as long as it's folk music, it's okay. And we thought on that slightly depressing note we'd leave it in the style of the book.
Thank you very much, Harriet and Lucy and Alistair. Thank you so much. And we were wondering if you would mind just playing us a couple of ad-lib tunes as we're about to go and have our afternoon tea. Would everybody like to hear some more tunes? Yes? Would you mind?